Welcome back, everybody, to the ROI Online Podcast. And today I'm excited for you to meet someone that's very interesting. And, when we think about as a business owner, as a marketing director, as a story brand guide, you know, we believe that the invisible heroes of the American economy are you because you're leading small teams and you're impacting our economy. You're providing opportunities for people to have jobs. And that's why the conversations on this episode and all the rest are so important for you. It's like, how does this help you when the rubber hits the road? So, first, I have a question for you. What do you get when you mix someone who wants to study music, study technology, study poker, and study story? You get someone who steps up to fill a position for a small startup because that's just what they needed in that moment. And then what happens? Well, that little company gets acquired by a bigger fish, a bigger company. And about 8 years later, that person who has that unique talent stack becomes the chief product officer for an internationally publicly traded company called HubSpot. But wait, there's more. That's not all. He also decides, hey, I think I'll start a band. And then, like our first album, we'll have on YouTube, we'll have our songs download like 5.5 million views, 1 and something million views, just whatever. I'd love to introduce you to Christopher O'Donnell. Christopher, welcome to the ROI Online Podcast.
Oh, Steve, thanks so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to this.
Good. So in the pre-convo with Christopher, here's where Christopher and I connect. Obviously, HubSpot, obviously marketing automation and sales stuff. Just Christopher is this guy that's got multiple value adds in a conversation with a business owner who's struggling to be relevant in today's online area. And so, but I think the thing that Christopher and I really want to explore today is this passion over story. Now, we were the original Story Brand certified agency. And last time I was at Inbound, I was wearing the Story Brand jacket, and Christopher came up to me and said, hey, I really like that stuff going on with Story Brand. And so today we're going to explore how is it that story and the rules of story really impact a business owner and how they want to apply that to business development. And in particular, where does that go in writing a song? Now, there's a communication challenge with a business leader. So Christopher, talk to us about why writing songs, how do you plan out communication to lead?
Yeah, well, it's without any question the biggest challenge and the biggest, most important part of my job. And thinking back to the different roles that I've had over the years, it's really for every one of those. It's been trying to get better at the power of narrative. Whether it was trying to get my way as a marketing ops associate in my first job, ever, or at a small startup, trying to get customers on board or understand where we fit in with the story, or, the product marketing and product development for a $7 billion company. I mean, it is everything. It is absolutely everything. I think Steve Jobs famously said, the most powerful person in the room will always be the best storyteller. Mm-hmm. And it really is. I mean, even reading Wall Street analyst notes, it's all storytelling. There's almost no part of the business that you can go into that is so dry and so uninteresting and so plain that it is not actually fundamentally storytelling. So no, that's the whole thing. I mean, I'm fascinated by every possible way that we can tell stories. The narrative structure. I mean, I have just the books on my desk. I have the 7 basic plots here.
Me too.
That's great. I have, I just got into this, some of the great Sid Field screenwriting books.
Yeah.
Because I'm just fascinated. Like I want to understand how movies are written. Not that I'm ever going to be a screenwriter, but just the structure and the impact. And there's so much research about how if you want people to remember something, give them a great story. That seems to be the entry point. So if you want to get information across, we as humans are hardwired in our lizard brains somehow. And I'm not a neuroscientist, so I can't break it down. But all I need to know is that is the most powerful way to get information across. And of course, leadership is all about, as my bosses remind me at work, absorbing confusion and passing down clarity.
Yeah.
And giving people an idea of what the challenge is and how they fit into it. I mean, we all are since we first as cave people looked up at the stars, had this question of how do we fit in to everything,
Right.
into the universe. And, our day jobs, we spend a third of our life, at work. And it's deeply important for us to understand how we fit in. And I guess, sort of finishing the thought here, as leaders, the most powerful thing that we can do is to communicate to each person on the team exactly why we're here, exactly what the mission is, and for them to understand how they fit in. And that's how they bring themselves to work in the best way and ultimately contribute the most value in their role. So it's absolutely critical. I'm a nerd about it. I'm a beginning student always in my life, and I'm thrilled to be here. I love the story brand stuff. I love you and I had fun at Inbound, running into each other. I mean, this is just the best part of what I get to do every day.
So tell us, Christopher, there was a time in the past where this epiphany happened, where it just clicked with you how our brains are set up and why story has to be weaved in. The honoring of the rules of story has to be weaved into what we do. When did that hit you?
That's a good question. I think it was a while ago when I read, it's a quick read, and it's sort of a pop sci book. It's a lot of fun, but Made to Stick by the Heath brothers.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool, it's kind of along the lines of the Donald Miller story brand stuff. They're definitely, I would put them on the same shelf in my office. But, their point that they made around, this is when it hit me. They make a point in the beginning of the book that urban myths are passed down for, generation after generation, year after year across the entire world with so many of the details perfectly intact.
Mm-hmm.
And they tell some of these urban myths, and I'm reading them and I'm like, I have heard that and told that exactly word for word the way that they are telling it, in sort of documenting it here. And then they reveal the magic trick with, a framework and sort of how to think about it. But that's the point that they make, is that we really relate to stories. The other point, the other example that they have in there that's fantastic is whoever the researcher was who was trying to educate the world about trans fat. And showing the numbers and the stats and the medical stuff and the studies and all this kind of stuff. Nobody cared at all. And finally, they held a press conference and had an entire 8-course Thanksgiving dinner or something, this huge amount of food on the buffet table laid out, and then a bag of movie theater popcorn next to it. And all the press conference was pointing out that there was as much fat in that bag of popcorn as in the entire Thanksgiving dinner. And then everybody picked it up and it went through, everybody picked up the story. It was this great story and it went out. And shortly thereafter, the movie theaters actually had to completely change their recipes for popcorn. So that was really when it hit me. I thought those were great examples. And then I look at work and think about the density of information that we need to distribute every day, and the thinking behind it. And I like the word that you used when we were just kind of hanging out before this, but the strategic mindset, which is so important, sort of connecting everybody's work. And it seemed at that point that, investing in storytelling was really, was really worthwhile pursuit.
Totally. We're in the same industry, and so we struggle. I struggle with it for years. Is how do I quickly get the business leaders I want to support to get these disconnected things, but they're complementary. And when you put them in a package, they're so powerful. But how do you take, like, hey, we got to get our messaging clear. Then we have to set you up in some technology and not get in the weeds and get confusing. And then we really need to get focused on a campaign mindset to run it through the system, right? And stories just really connect the dots so quickly. But it's like you have to really think about it and focus and work on it. And you said a key word there, the framework.
Hmm.
You think about every thought leader you follow, there's some framework that they communicate clearly that makes us really appreciate and be attracted to their messaging. They have books, they do presentations, they speak, and that's how we learned about them. Every great leader gets this. But I think what's really cool and sexy about what you're doing is you've taken it and gone this route with this band and songwriting, which is very vulnerable. It's very, you're putting yourself out there to be criticized, judged. Well, even one of your songs addresses that, but
Yeah,
that's
no, that's
what
true. That's true.
every leader has to get past and see their identity different. Tell us about that journey where it was so impactful. You even wrote a song about it to be criticized about what you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's I'll tell you, to this day, nothing is scarier or harder than doing vocal takes in a studio. Getting in front of a fancy microphone, and having the engineer behind the glass and the whole thing, and your bandmates and your friends watching and everything. I mean, I'll tell you, even Prince, who played all the instruments and played shows at his house and, constantly playing music, even Prince recorded his vocals entirely by himself in the dead of night without the engineer even there. I mean, it's so raw and embarrassing. And tough. And so that's, man, I'll tell you, that's a quick way to stay humble, is to do some vocal takes. And yeah, I mean, even years before getting to that point with the band, I remember walking, I had a little baby at the time. My son was, 1-2 years old, and I would walk him into daycare every morning, and walking down Cambridge Street in Cambridge, Mass, on my way to work, dropping him off at daycare, and every day thinking, when am I going to get the courage to call this guy Brad? When am I going to be able to call Brad and say, would you come and play music with me? And Brad was, in his late 50s at the time, and had played with so many of my heroes and toured the world and played MSG and all these kinds of things. And we'd worked together on a project once and got along well. And I just, for years and years and years, I didn't have the courage to just reach out to him and say, hey, I've been practicing, I've been writing, I've been doing more music stuff by myself. Would you give me some feedback? Would you hang out with me? So the day when I finally called him, he picked right up and he said, oh yeah, let's go play music. I'll bring a drummer. And so we went out and we played some Jimi Hendrix tunes one night. And that was fun and everything. But he called me the next morning and he goes, look, I played those tunes a million times. You got any songs? Do you have anything is there a journey here that we can look at and think about going down together? And I had, Steve, probably 8 tunes that I had demos of. I had never played them for a single human, not my wife, not my friends,
Wow.
nobody. And I sent them in an email to Brad, and my phone rings 2 hours later, and he just says, we're making a record, And it was amazing. And he was able to sort of say, hey, here's, maybe we forget about these 2 or these 3, but these 4, these 5, man, let's get together and get some musicians in here and play, and tell me about the songs and tell me about the stories and all this kind of stuff. And then that energy just sort of became infectious, and we got wrapped up in it and ended up making this whole record, and so much of it is about sort of sharing the story and getting enough excitement going that it pulls you through those hard parts. Because I'll tell you, by the time we ended up having to go in and do the vocal takes, there was no turning back, you know? We had a music teacher, both of us share this amazing music teacher, this guy, Dave Zinno. And I remember Dave writing me on Facebook and saying, so you're making this record with Brad, that's great. And you're going to sing. And I say, yeah, I'm going to sing. And he just texts me, he's just like, oh boy, there's no turning back now. And he was right. So, you know, some of it, and that's kind of, I mean, you mentioned poker. That's sort of the poker thing too, is sometimes you just have to tie yourself to a hand. You know, sometimes you just have to commit yourself enough so that whatever happens, but you know, you're going to see it through to showdown. And it's been a lot of fun.
I want to explore that because one of the things I realized in our agency, getting someone to produce content about what they do is really hard. And so we started our agency. That's what was the main value that we started to offer, is help them produce the content for them and then publish it.
Sure.
And that's a struggle because they have to change their identity to, okay, I do have something unique. I do have something valuable, even though I'm an attorney, or maybe I'm a plastic surgeon, but there's a transformation that we're expecting of them that we have to lead them through. But let's talk about all the arguments you had in your head before you made that call. This is the same thing that a leader goes through. Changing their identity, coming out of what they know their uglies are in the past to seeing what they could potentially do. They have to win this argument. Help us experience what you were feeling, and how did you get past it?
I remember a story that somebody, actually a musician that I was working with, I was making a record for her. This was actually how Brad and I met. This was about 20 years ago. And she offered her story of kind of that breakthrough. And it always stuck with me. Now, she was visiting some new friends and was in their apartment. And there was a big framed photograph and this famous photographer who'd made all this money, you know, and the photograph was worth all this money and all this kind of stuff. And my friend looked up at it and says to the owner of the apartment, I could have taken that. And he looked at her and he said, but you didn't, you know? And I always think about that. It's like, okay, so what were my excuses? Well, my songs aren't any good. Well, you know, who am I? I'm just this, you know, I'm this this yuppie in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You know, I'm a white picket fence guy. What do I have to say? Or I'm too young, or I'm too old. Like, you know, depending on the day, I was either too young to be a songwriter, or I was already over the hill, you know. And you're just coming up with all of these walls and all of these barriers and all of these kinds of excuses. And you know what? There aren't that many people writing songs. You know, there aren't that many people out there really trying to do this. And whatever it is that you're trying to do, whatever story you're trying to tell, and this is the sort of the brilliance of inbound marketing, is that with, you know, this transition into the online, whether you're a plastic surgeon or a lawyer or a pool, you know, I mean, the famous early HubSpot story with Marcus Sheridan, and, you know, he had a pool business that he was running with his brother, and he just started putting online the answers that he would give over the phone every day. You know, oh, well, I can tell you when to use a vinyl liner, and I could tell you when to do this and do that. And he started getting creamed with traffic. I mean, this guy, I mean, he's a famous sales coach now and all this kind of stuff, but he made millions of dollars putting pools in because, you know, people needed to be told how to think about this. And, you know, there's always a human story. There's always a human story and real anxiety and pain, no matter what product or service you have. There's always a human story, whether it's a song or, you know, an outdoor pool or something. I mean, there's always a human story, and sort of tapping into that and just putting your best foot forward, getting it out there. You know, you're already ahead at 99% of the other people who, like in my friend's example, they never took the picture. They never bought a camera. They never, you know, put a little dark room together in their basement. And so, you know, really just even showing up is already a huge advantage. But it's hard. I mean, to your point, it's hard. And with the technologies, I mean, that's my day job, is trying to make that technology a little bit easier to get into. And, okay, so it's more approachable to do marketing automation. But I'll tell you that even marketing automation, look, we can make the software easier, but you got to tell the story. I mean, the only marketer I know of who has increasing open rates over the course of an email drip campaign uses the same serialized storytelling technique that Lost in some of these 24, these really cliffhanger kind of shows, and uses that in email marketing to get people to sort of to keep going. But again, I mean, so much of it is that people just never even click the shutter. They never even take the picture. They never even try.
So facing this fear, I call it courage. There's bravery and there's courage. Courage is courage is you being naked and scared, but you still run toward the thing that's scaring you, right? And bravery is like you practice, and you've gone through the scenario 100 times, and so you wear the protective gear, but you're extremely effective. And there's this time that business owners just have to be courageous. They do it because it has to be done, even though they don't feel brave, right? And so you started doing that. How long did it take you to make that call to expose the songs that you hadn't shared with anyone?
Definitely, it was probably 3 years. I probably wrote, and I wrote 100 songs. I ended up sending Brad 8 of them. And I think he thought 4 or 5 of them were worth kind of going further on. So yeah, I mean, it took a really long time. And then before that, it took me years, in my late 20s, I majored in music. And then as I got older and wanted to sort of have a family and be a real grown up and so forth, I kind of put the guitar in the closet and stepped away from all that. And it took me years to have the courage to even go grab an instrument and sit back down and say, I'm going to practice. I mean, that actually was as hard in my late 20s, early 30s as it was, years later calling Brad or years after that, trying to do guitar takes in front of a bunch of people in the studio or vocal takes. So it's amazing. It's sometimes the courage it's just you and a laptop and you still need that courage,
Totally.
Which is very humbling.
Totally. So I was listening to Brad, he was doing one of his lessons.
Yeah.
Okay. And so he says, first you have to imitate.
Yes.
Then you have to assimilate. And then you have to create. And so I was thinking about that. That's a framework. Okay. And he has a system. So you imitate because you need to learn. There's things you're going to learn that no one can say to you and it wouldn't sink into you. So you have to go through that experience imitating, whether it's a business owner, as a leader, whether it's a parent. Okay. Then over time, you start to assimilate. Assimilate's the stage where you and I could be talking about this unique experience that we share, and the light bulb goes off and we say, oh, I'm not crazy. Someone else is experiencing it. And then create is where you give yourself the permission to put your unique perspective on it. That's pretty much the stages of a business, the stages of a leader. I love that framework that he talked about.
Oh, and I mean, talk about a framework that he obviously is speaking in a musical context. And if you want to be an amazing bass player, you should go learn to imitate James Jamerson. It's very clear. There's like the number one thing, and I don't think there's a bass player alive that would disagree with that. You got to go and just imitate note for note for note everything that James Jamerson did, and then Ray Brown and Tommy Cogbill and there are a million others. But if you don't have that, like in music, they say having it under your fingers, and just kind of being able to live in that world a little bit, even if you are absolutely obsessing over note for note what somebody else has done in the past. And, I do that at work. I do that at work all the time. If it's reading a book about a great leader, I'm reading Ride of a Lifetime right now by Bob Iger, CEO of Disney. It's a great book, or Shoe Dog, Phil Knight. Sometimes you pick up these things and you say, hey, this is an interesting
aspect of a leadership style, I'm going to try it. And then you go out and you actually try these things. And then over time, you start to notice what's working and what's not working. And for me, in the assimilate stage, there's a word that I really gravitate toward, which is authentic. And it's that bridge, as you say, between imitating somebody else and then finding your own voice in it. I've tried a million things in my leadership style, and a lot of them haven't worked. A lot of them haven't worked. And I try to get the feedback on what's working and not working. And I also know from within myself what works and doesn't work. And I have a speaking coach who's really, to be honest, he's a storytelling coach more than a public speaking coach. And finding the things where I could just do it all day because it is coming from within me. And you know what? We watch game tape. We watch game tape of every time I do anything in public speaking, internal or external. And we take the Zoom recording and we break it down and we watch parts of it, and it's totally painful. But we also look at, Martin Luther King. We look at JFK. We look at all of these, game tape of other leaders, and he shows me what they're doing. The repetition that MLK would do, the repetition and the notes and the pitch and all these kinds of things. And then I can go into work and maybe I'm announcing a reorg or something, or a new product or something like that. And I can try that technique that we saw somebody else do. And over time, the ones that kind of stick are the ones that it doesn't feel like I'm faking it. After a certain point, it feels like I've discovered a little bit more of my own voice. And then the create part is just letting it rip, and going out there and trying something new. And I don't know if I'm quite at the create stage yet, but I look forward to being there someday.
Well, you're doing the work. You'll get there. So the light bulb went on with me on the similarity of a presentation to a song. When I was watching Simon Sinek and his golden circle, or the why presentation. Yes. So if you watch that, if you were to break it down into a story, he's got the opening, you get some familiar, and then he does the and I'm not a music dude, but the refrain, that's the repeat, the part that repeats over and
absolutely.
over. Totally. So people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. That's his refrain. Yes. But he does this, introduce you to something familiar, but then he brings in this new thing that's like, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to listen to that. And then you get comforted by the reframe. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. I remember that. But every great presentation has a version of that. And so that was like, I really wanted to explore that with you. When you're writing your songs, let's talk about why. First, you decided on a genre, your audience, your songs. Now, so this is not like crushing on you're an artist and you have a band, but this is business application process.
Oh, it's very, it's a little bit logical and Cartesian. And at the highest level, a bit formulaic. Even reading about how to write a screenplay, it's formulaic in a certain sense, and there are certain criteria, and there are ways of doing leadership talks. And, Simon Sinek, there are things about his talks that are consistent and that work and that have existed for centuries and centuries in the oral tradition of storytelling. And so I love this topic. What are the things to kind of look for? Well, you need characters, you need characters. And if you are a plastic surgeon and you're marketing your services, you need characters. You need stories. You need before and after. You need transformation and redemption and, freedom and a problem. You need to start these stories in medias res. I remember seeing Simon, he spoke at Inbound one year. And at the time, he was he had this great talk that he would give, and he comes out and he's in the middle of a story of these army guys who are pinned down in a valley, and you've heard that story, right? It's a great story, but he just comes out on stage, and you're here, and he has a whiteboard up, and he's going to do this whole business thing and everything, and he comes out and he takes 5, 10, 15 minutes and tells an army story that starts with, a couple of guys in the trenches who think they're going to die. I mean, that's a great technique. Like, these are the techniques that we're looking for. So if I get up to announce a new product, if I'm working on the positioning and the feature set of a new product, I want to know the person. I want to know at the beginning of that talk, when I go to, sort of take this narrative and get everybody excited about it, it's going to be about somebody in their life. It's going to have a face. It's going to have a name. They're going to have a name. We're going to know what kind of car they drive. We're going to know how they get a promotion. We're going to know how they get fired. We're going to know what they think of their boss. We're going to know all of that context. And that's the interesting part. I mean, we get to the software, we get to the sort of what we're going to do. I actually just had a one-on-one with one of our engineering VPs this morning. And, we're working on the architecture for a bunch of stuff together and the really nitty-gritty details. But when we get an hour to talk to each other in person, we want to go through these stories.
Yeah.
That's what we spend our time talking about. I mean, we can Slack and email about, how to do SQL this and, distributed systems that. That's stuff that we can kind of deal with in almost downtime. I mean, the real energy with each other is understanding the stories. And I pulled him onto a call the other day with somebody. I'm like, I just want you to see this person. Before we get into the software, I just want you to see this person.
Mm.
And we asked this person questions about their career. Tell us in 2013, this career transition, tell us how you felt. Tell us the story of your career. And by the time we get to the end of that, guess what? I don't need much of a Google Doc for the VP of engineering.
Right.
He gets it. He knows. This is what sucks about this job,
Yeah.
and he can daydream on it. And this is the key for leadership too, is that if you give people that narrative and the human story, your people will come to you with ideas you would have never thought of.
Right.
Because they start daydreaming about it. It's like the dog walking time for me, or some people call it the shower time, the shower cycles. Like that, especially in this day and age, it's so much of when we actually do our creative work. So back to songwriting, it's all the same stuff. It's in medias res, starting something in the middle of a story and creating these characters. And then the art there is to leave enough of it universal so that you're saying something specific and you have a very specific idea as a writer of the actual narrative arc. But as opposed to a movie where you actually show a lot of those details, in a song, it's almost entirely left to the imagination. So if you think of, Josie by Steely Dan, it's this song about homecoming. It's this song about this character, and she comes home and there's this amazing excitement about her coming back. And that's kind of all you know. It's kind of all you know, but it's an incredible song, and we can sort of reflect our own lives onto this moment of homecoming, which is, that's like the Odyssey. When Josie comes home, it's like Odysseus coming home to Ithaca, at the end of the Odyssey. I mean, these stories are universal.
So that point you're making right there was a million versions of a homecoming in all these people's heads,
right?
Sparked by the framework of that song. But we put our details in it, and it's our story. Yes. And it's like we hear that song and we think of that moment in time, sparked by someone doing some work, following a framework, and releasing that in us.
That's exactly it. And if you do that at work, what happens is you're telling a story, you're leaving a lot of the details open. Mm-hmm. And that's what's really key, working with, and not to draw a sort of false parallel here. I mean, it is literally exactly the same. Working with engineers and working with drummers, it's literally the same, because you want that person to do something that you couldn't quite describe.
Yeah.
And you want them to do something where at the end of the take, you're just like, holy crap. And I have those moments at work where an engineer will Slack me and go, hey, yeah, you said that, you said with this one thing that, people are really nervous to do this. And so, here's a way that we could do, a dry run of this thing. And so they could see what would happen without having to commit to it. The engineering, or the engineers, we met about this and we were talking about that. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, that would be incredible. And I would have never seen usually you're going in and you're going, well, how long would it take to do X, Y, and Z thing I thought of and everything like that? You're way better off telling the story and having people come to you, or having the drummer do a great take and then the drummer say, you know what, give me one more, I'm going to do it a different way. And then that's the take, So it's very much about the open space in the narrative and letting people be creative and kind of own that story for themselves.
So I call that ninja leadership, okay? It's indirect leading by releasing, having the confidence to not be in control or having the drive, but you're dropping this catalyst into this person's mind and releasing this energy because they can see the vision where you're going on the horizon, but they're going to bring their value to it, and you get something you could have never even conceived, much less direct.
It's absolutely true. So this happened the other. I love that ninja leadership. That's we had one recently where we're going to ask a bunch of teams to do a bunch of work, and so we met with them and they sort of submitted how they're thinking about it and their early thoughts and so forth. And I'm pushing off on all sides any conversation of timeline. And I have this brilliant chief of staff at work, and she said to me, so when are we going to, at some point here, we need to have a timeline. And I found myself saying, I was like, you know what? We need to let them fall in love with it first. We need to give them the time to really do their own research, talk to their own customers, and sleep on this and fall in love with the problem we're trying to solve before we start asking, hey, when can we get this done by? I mean, there's no it yet. We don't know what it is. And, I can give them a starting point of, I think it's this, I think it's this, I think it's this. But I'm in many cases better off saying, here are the people you ought to talk to. Here's the way we're thinking about these different products and who they're going to be for. And this is a famous product management trick. Anytime somebody a founder or something says, go build this thing, say, oh, I'd love to. That sounds fascinating. Can you introduce me to 5 customers who would want this? And what will happen is almost all the time it just disappears. Or you talk to the people and you realize they don't need it. Or more often what happens is you'll talk to people and you'll come back to that founder with a better idea and say, hey, I explored this and this is where my imagination took me.
I love that example. That example that you just described. Think of where you are in your leadership journey. You weren't in the imitate leadership answers to that question. You weren't in the assimilate. That was in the create stage of leadership, right? You wouldn't have been able in 4 years ago, in whatever position you had with HubSpot, you wouldn't have came with that answer because you were still struggling with your self-identity, where you fit in the organization in a lot of ways. So you would have given some version of an assimilated. You would have timeline needs to be between this window and this window. But that answer you just gave is in the create stage of leadership. That's cool.
I'm sure I could find, somewhere where I stole that way of thinking. But for me, it's authentic. That's the good and bad part of working around me is, that autonomy and that sort of creative space. I feel really, really strongly about it. And there's some product leaders and some folks who do what I do, where they just have the whole vision in their head and they go and they tell everybody down to the pixel exactly how it's going to play out. And I'm not that way. And I think music really showed me that because, I can make a demo and I can play the instruments. I'm a good enough piano player. I can do a piano part, but it's not going to be great. The way you get a great piano part is you make the best demo you can, and then you show it to somebody you think would be amazing, adding their thing, and then you shut up. Right. And you let them kind of just say, this is the famous thing that happens after your take. It's you hear take and it's pretty good. And then they go, well, give me another one. Give me another one. Give me another one.
But they need to feel safe to go.
Yes.
but you need to feel safe. So that demo has to attract them and sell them and help them see the bigger version of what you're describing that you can't put into words.
That, I think, is the professional challenge that is most attractive to me, is what you just said. You know, I've always wanted to be around people who are way better at me at a million different things that I just thought were so cool. And to kind of try to be the person to get them to share a vision and then do something that made everybody kind of just go, wow, how cool is that? You know, I was never the best musician that I hung out with. I always hung out with people who were way better than me. And you know what? I was the one who brought the 4-track. I was the one who, you know, sort of said, hey, why don't we do that thing that, you know, that last couple of bars that you folks were just playing. Let's loop that up, you know, keep going on that thing. That's the part that I find really, really fascinating.
The culture that you're lucky to be a part of has provided you the safety to be in that create stage of your leadership. Imagine giving that answer that you did, but being in an organization that's like, that's a great opening to attack you and diminish your leadership a little bit for my gain. That's beautiful. I love that example.
Well, and I mean, we do have a lot of safety at work. And it took years and years and years and a lot of vulnerability and a lot of, you know, breakthroughs. I mean, breakthroughs around becoming more open to feedback. And I found that once I started getting more open to feedback, I started getting a lot more of it, you know, particularly from peers and colleagues, which was, you know, totally transformative. And then also, you know, telling people when I was really impressed. That was a remarkable breakthrough, is, you know, for my own imposter syndrome, with which I struggle mightily, as I suspect most of us or almost all of us do. Mm-hmm. When I see something that's intimidatingly good at work, and I started this a couple of years ago, I would just reach out to them and tell them, like, oh, that was a really amazing presentation. I saw a guy at work do a 3-hour presentation on pricing and packaging. It's like one of the hardest things to do and the easiest thing to poke holes in. And like you're saying, I mean, it's just a total political minefield. There's nothing like it. I saw this guy at work, Brad Coffey, do this, and he did this 2-hour, you know, executive team meeting, and he led this thing. And I just had to write him a note afterward and say, I could never have done that. Like, that was a clinic. That was really amazing. And you know what? He said back to me a couple of nice things too, and you know, gave me some tips on how to think about approaching a problem like that. So, you know, it's hard fought. And building this software, I have to say, one of the most encouraging things about it is seeing people leave situations where they don't feel safe, mm-hmm. because they have a skill set. You know, they have the freedom. I mean, you have freedom. You can go and work with companies that you feel comfortable working with, whose missions and whose personalities and so forth. You have that freedom. That is why I want to build software, because in business software in particular, because you actually, on a good day, give people the freedom to pick up shop and go and say, hey, look, you know what? I talked to a woman the other day, and she said, yeah, I was at this job, and I was director of marketing, but they wanted me to do all this cold email and do all this kind of stuff. And so I just left. And she picked up and, you know, got a job somewhere else, brought HubSpot in, built them a website, and she was a hero, you know, and she's like, oh, I love the leaders at this new place, all this kind of stuff. So, you know, I think that the psychological safety is massive, and it's hard, and it requires a lot of our own vulnerability if we want that ourselves.
So HubSpot is one of the most enlightened sales-centric organization I've bumped into. I've really been impressed at the acumen of sales, enlightened right. Sales, not arm-twisting sales, but enlightened. But when I was listening to a couple of your songs, like All I Know, okay, so I'm listening to that song. Now, you have some persuasive application going in there, and there's a book by not the Challenger Customer. not to challenge your sale, but to challenge your customer.
Oh,
And it
interesting.
talks about the power of you phrasing in your messaging. Okay. So when you
Yes,
take,
cool.
often we'll go, so we love helping people because we see this going on and we do that. And that's nice. And okay, but it doesn't pull me into the story. But when you say, Christopher, when you were struggling with sharing these songs with Brad, and you probably had that conversation with yourself 4 or 5, I don't know, let's say 2 years, and finally you do this, you're sucked into that story, and that story sticks with you. That was one of your things of that picture example. That
Right,
story stuck
right.
with me. But the you phrasing in songs is what
Mm.
you're pulling me into, that very general narrative, but I get to fill in all the details. But when you say, I know you, but you and you, and I'm sitting there going, I know an example where that applies in my life.
Mm. We used to joke in high school about Steely Dan songs. Actually, I mentioned
Yeah,
that Steely Dan song. They're all written in the second person.
yeah.
It's like you were standing, it's like all like second person. We used to goof around, and make up fake Steely Dan songs. And the whole joke of it was they're all in the second person. But you know what? I saw that the other day. I was looking at somebody had written up a few examples of some great product marketing. It's the kind of stuff we share around all the time. Like, oh, look at these. I went and I looked at folks doing this kind of thing, and here are the messages. And that was my note in the Google Doc. I was like, look at all these taglines. These 3 taglines we really like are all in the second person.
Mm-hmm.
They're all about you. And talking about the story brand stuff and what we were kind of goofing on at Inbound,
Mm-hmm.
the hero's journey, obviously. And then Donald Miller's kind of whole thing with story brand to me is this idea of you being the hero.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about us being the hero.
Right.
I mean, Apple, I don't think Apple bothered doing a press release. They launched like the coolest office ever built in the world. I think they're not going to do a press release like, hey, look at this awesome office we built. People have to fly drones over it to take pictures of it. Apple doesn't care about telling that story. When Apple goes, and this is Donald Miller's example, to market the iPod, it's black dancing silhouettes so that we can imagine ourselves, so that we can live for a moment in the idea of dancing like nobody's looking at us, like we don't care at all. That's what they're selling. And so I just absolutely love that. I love the second person. I was talking to our head of product marketing about it yesterday. She had a cool tagline idea. And I was like, that's in the second person, and it's challenging, and it's so exciting, and I love it so much.
So, I think about the anthems, at certain times in our life, we had this anthem song, right?
Yes.
And I was, not that this one was one of mine. I'm curious about what yours were, but you think about Foreigner, you're as cold as ice. And they have these songs that take advantage of that. What was your anthem, by the way? So here, when you're like, I want to study music, I want to study story, I want to study poker, what's your anthem?
Oh, man, so many anthems. I mean, over the years. Well, when I was a teenager, I read somewhere that the music you listen to when you were 13 is the music that you most identify with emotionally for the rest of your life. I was listening to Blues Traveler back in the day, and that stuff was written in the second person. Run Around.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about like, why you want to give me the run? Why are you doing this to me? What were the other anthems? I mean, later on, Use Somebody by Kings of Leon. I mean, what an amazing song where it starts in the second, the verses are in the first person, but the punchline is in the second person.
Mm-hmm.
I was running around, always looking down, at every face I see. Like, he tells this beautiful story. And then the punchline is, I could use somebody like you. Mm. And so it takes the listener, and it builds up almost like stretching a rubber band, builds up all of this tension, and then it places the listener at the heart of the story in this really, really beautiful kind of last minute kind of way. So those are a couple anthems, but I mean, there's so many. High Tide or Low Tide, Bob Marley. Deep Cut. The Bob Marley stuff, is really, really close to my heart. And always sang it to my kids, and grew up kind of listening to it. High Tide or Low Tide, that's a great one. You'll Be by My Side, again in the second person. Absolutely. It's all about these like placing the listener in the universe, making promises, fulfilling those promises.
So where do you see that the business leaders that are listening, the story brand guides, the marketing directors, this big lever of really clear storytelling, it has to go into the platform or the technology of the day. It's a perennial application, perennial or universal principle, always be applicable and legitimate. You go back 4,000 years, it was, standing on a rock in front of a bunch of people. Yeah, you go back 150 years, you're standing on a wagon talking to some folks selling snake oil. Or maybe that's not the good example, but it's everybody
Well,
sees
luckily
it.
marketing's come a long way, I think.
How do you take the technology of our day and bake that in? And it's a legitimate business application, period.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most obvious starting point there is personalization, and looking at what Amazon has done and trying to each of us provide for our own customers a level of personalization and relevance, and so that story is just tailored, really to each person. And then from there, yeah, we can get into the technology and, smart content on your website and, the different offers that you're putting out and different sort of stories that you tell and the use of different more relevant case studies. I mean, all of that stuff is absolutely real. And we can all find online a million examples of how to think about that. But for me, what it comes down to is it actually using StoryBrand. It really comes down to the problem section of that SB7 framework, and really understanding the villain and the internal, external, and philosophical problem. Like that, to me, is the really hard part. The rest of it, not to underplay the rest of the steps, they're really important, but the rest of it is, I think, kind of easy. And mapping those things onto the technology is actually pretty easy once you have the problem statement and the villain really nicely identified.
Totally. I'd love to start by envisioning what's our desired transformation.
Yes.
And so when we talk about what a desired transformation, what's that aspirational image, it helps me see the change that we want them to make. And then we can start building out the character better. The external problem, obvious problem, but then what's our insecurities, that internal problem? That's really cool. I love that you're utilizing that and talk about it so well. So we're wrapping up. Just a couple of questions here. And then first of all, so this is a great conversation. So much.
I could do this all day. I love this. I love this.
So that's awesome. Why is it Boston bands? What's the deal with Boston and bands? Why? You think about anthem songs, Boston literally, or Aerosmith,
yes.
Right? Why Boston? What's going on there that makes it like a center of good music or good bands?
I don't know, man. I don't know. It's a drinking town with a baseball problem, I guess. I don't know. I mean, part of it is the sports culture, I think, Dropkick Murphys and, Sweet Caroline, some of that stuff, obviously takes hold around here because of the sort of sports zeitgeist. That's definitely a big piece of it. Aerosmith, huge. Boston, huge. I don't know what it is. I mean, there are a lot of really bright people around, a lot of universities, the Berklee College of Music, really. So it becomes sort of a pilgrimage for a lot of people in their music careers to kind of at least do a stint in Boston at some point in their lives. I don't know. Maybe that's part of it. I'm not quite sure.
So would you say the success of your songs are because you're really honoring the rules of story, and those are really focused strongly on those? I mean, to have that many downloads on YouTube when this is your first public swing at marketing yourself, so to speak, what's going on there?
I think also is we're very much in the audience discovery phase of this. And so it's kind of getting the music in front of as many people as we can. And then kind of understanding who's responding to it, whether it's age demographics or geography, and just kind of finding pockets and sort of doubling down there. So it's probably a bit of the marketing analytics type A-ness. And I would love to think that it's the stories and the songs. But we got to find the people who they speak to, and that's we're still very much in that kind of phase.
Dude, that ties the knot really well in this conversation on how story and the application of technology in this marketing is a legitimate business process. Your product is a legitimate business here. It's not just making songs for fun necessarily. That's an outlet. It's fulfilling, but there's the rubber. It's got to hit the road to justify you continuing on in this. That's a great way to tie it up. So is there a point where Mark Wahlberg, he's like going to take this and put it in one of his movies because he's super Boston focused? Is that in your marketing plan?
Well, I would appreciate the introduction. That would be great.
All right. Christopher, thank you so much, man. I value and I appreciate you. And this has been a great conversation. And I think the folks are going to get a lot of value out of this.
I hope they really do. Everybody check out the providers on Spotify. And if anybody's curious about, working with HubSpot, go to hubspot.com/jobs. We're hiring remote, every department, you name it. It's a great place to work. Number one place in the U.S. According to Glassdoor to work. So come introduce yourself and come hang with us if you so feel.
It's a place where you're going to imitate, assimilate, and begin to create because that culture
certainly
is there at HubSpot. Christopher, thanks for being on the ROI Online Podcast.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, that was